Hello, and thank you for taking the time to view our presentation on proposed changes to regulations that dictate where and how many cannabis businesses may locate within the city of San Jose. My name is Alex Hughes, and I'm a planner with the Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement Department of San Jose, and we are working closely with the San Jose Police Department, the lead agency on this policy work. This presentation will cover an overview of where we are in the update process. I will explain the components of cannabis regulation, the current regulations, the proposed changes, and finally, I'll go over the next steps and how you can contact city staff with questions and comments. Also, you can pause or rewind this video at any time to review the content of these slides, and I'll explain how to get a copy of these slides later in the presentation. First, let's talk about how this project started and where we are now. Back in March 2019, the City Council held their annual priority session, where they directed staff to review and propose an update to the city's cannabis regulations. They specifically directed evaluating an increase in the number of cannabis businesses allowed in the city, revising the zoning ordinance so that cannabis retail businesses can locate in commercial zones, and other changes that we will discuss in this presentation. Although this work was slowed due to the pandemic, throughout 2019 and 2020, staff researched, evaluated, and formed an initial recommendation on proposed changes. A survey to get public input was posted for a month in March 2021. The survey generated a total of approximately 950 responses and was available in 3 different languages. Staff also held a virtual community meeting in April 2021 to present potential changes and gain additional input. In that same month, staff's initial draft proposal was presented to the Community and Economic Development City Council Committee for further direction. The committee directed several changes from staff's initial proposal, which were then brought back to the committee for review in June 2021. The committee gave more direction about the proposed changes and instructed staff to conduct additional outreach and then return to the full city council with the draft ordinance for a decision. This presentation is part of that additional outreach. Now, I'm going to talk about the components of cannabis regulation because it's important to know how San Jose currently regulates cannabis businesses so that you can better understand the proposed changes. There are 4 major components of cannabis regulation. State regulations. These set the minimum requirements necessary for operating in the state of California. While San Jose can't be less restrictive than the state, it can be and is in some respects more restrictive. You can find out more information regarding what these regulations are on our website under the Cannabis Business Ordinance Update section. The Municipal Code. The Muni Code, often called that for short, addresses how cannabis businesses may operate in the city. The City Manager Regulations clarify and further regulate how cannabis businesses may operate in the city. The zoning ordinance, this controls where cannabis businesses can locate within the city. Of the 4 components of cannabis regulation, there are 3 areas the city is looking to change. These are the municipal code, city manager regulations, and the zoning ordinance. The municipal code, specifically chapter 6.88, in Title VI, sets location and operation conditions for cannabis businesses. For example, only 1 dispensary, also referred to as a retail storefront, is allowed per registered business. There are public safety requirements like security guards and video surveillance, and regulations which outline what good neighbor requirements are, like trash cleanup and no on-site consumption of cannabis or cannabis products. The Muni Code is also responsible for creating the Equity Assistance Program. Proposed changes to Title VI include adding definitions for cannabis storefront and delivery-only uses, and defining what an equity applicant is to help facilitate the upcoming Equity Applicant Program launch. The city manager regulations determine when cannabis registration for new applicants is open or closed. Registration is currently closed for dispensary and cultivation businesses, but it is open for manufacturing, distribution, and testing labs. It also prohibits delivery-only uses and requires all businesses to obtain a notice of completed registration before operation. The proposed changes to the city manager regulations include allowing the 16 existing businesses to open a second retail storefront dispensary, allow delivery only cannabis uses within the city, and opening registration for 10 new cannabis equity applicants for either retail storefront or delivery only locations. Up to 5 of these 10 new locations could be retail storefronts. The zoning ordinance determines where cannabis businesses may locate. For example, currently, all cannabis uses are limited to industrial zoning districts, and they may not open or operate in enterprise zones, which are the North San Jose Area Development Policy, Edenvale Area Development Policy Area, and the International Business Park. The zoning ordinance also prevents cannabis uses from locating within certain distances from sensitive uses, such as schools and parks. This section also requires a zoning verification certificate, which is a required component for a cannabis business to register with the city. The zoning verification certificate is the step in the registration process where city staff make sure a cannabis business will locate in a place that is consistent with the zoning ordinance restrictions. Most of the proposed changes we are presenting to you are in the zoning ordinance. Changes include allowing retail cannabis storefronts in commercial zoning districts and disallowing any new retail cannabis storefront from opening in industrial zoning districts, updating distance criteria from sensitive uses, and allowing a zoning verification certificate to expire if a holder of that certificate does not take steps to implement a cannabis use. Let's talk about sensitive uses. Currently, cannabis dispensaries and cultivation uses are prohibited from opening within 1,000 feet of a public or private preschool, elementary or secondary school, child daycare center, community or recreation center, park, or library. 500 feet of a substance abuse rehabilitation center or emergency residential shelter, 150 feet of a religious assembly, adult daycare center, or any residential use, or 50 feet of another dispensary. Also, no cannabis use may locate on the ground floor in the downtown primary commercial zoning district or on a parcel or parcels totaling over 40 acres in size. This proposal for changes to distance requirements to sensitive receptors reflects the most recent Community and Economic Development Committee direction. One change is adding different distance requirements to sensitive uses for properties that are located in downtown or an urban village. These different distance requirements are because downtown and urban villages are denser mixed-use areas where everything is in closer proximity. For everywhere in the city outside of downtown and urban villages, the distance requirements to sensitive uses would be largely kept the same. This proposal would add use centers to the list of sensitive uses that would be at least 1,000 feet from a cannabis retail use. Other proposed changes are changing the way we measure the required distance between a cannabis retail storefront use and a residential use, and to increase it from 150 feet to 300 feet. Also, the distance requirement between cannabis retail storefront uses would increase from 50 feet to 1,000 feet. For the downtown area, which is defined by the general plan, much of the ordinance will align with the minimum distance required by the state with a few modifications. The state requires 600 feet from schools, child daycare centers, and youth centers. But for downtown, this proposal would increase the requirement from schools to 1,000 feet. There is no proposed distance required from residential uses downtown, and the distance required from another dispensary is reduced to 500 feet from the 1,000 feet required outside of downtown. Urban villages, also defined by the general plan, would be similar to downtown, but all of the state mandated distances would be increased from 600 feet to 1,000 feet. Like downtown, no distance from residential uses would be required. Throughout the entire city, except for downtown, the 500 feet distance would be required from a substance abuse rehabilitation center or an emergency residential shelter. Distances are measured for all sensitive uses, except residential ones, from the closest property line of the sensitive use to the nearest building or portion of a building containing a cannabis business. I will cover how the distance measurement from residential uses would change in upcoming slides. The restriction from opening on a parcel of over 40 acres in size would remain. Another important change is that cannabis retail businesses would not be allowed to open in areas of the city that are in a police beat, which reports 20% above the city average crime rate, with downtown and urban villages being excluded from this restriction. For comparison, here are the current and proposed changes for distance requirements side by side. If you look at where cannabis businesses are located today, it's clear the zoning ordinance created a concentration of these businesses in two council districts, District 3 and 7. These districts have between them roughly 85% of all sites that meet the current zoning ordinance standards and are home to 14 out of the 16 cannabis businesses. One of the goals of this policy update is to diversify where cannabis businesses may potentially locate throughout the city. Here's a map of the properties where retail dispensaries and delivery-only businesses could potentially locate based on the proposed criteria I just explained. Our research found close to 1,400 potentially eligible sites for retail storefronts and approximately 1,300 for delivery-only businesses. It's important to note that this analysis is just a snapshot in time based on the best available information we have at this time. Also, just because a site is potentially eligible based on the proposed zoning criteria, it does not mean the site is available or suitable for a cannabis business. Now let's go through some examples of how these requirements would be applied to a real property in San Jose, comparing the current regulations and the proposed ones. It's important to know that each of these examples is for illustrative purposes only, and there are no actual cannabis uses being proposed at these locations. Our first example is a commercial building on 96 South First Street. Here's what the building looks like. It might be familiar to you. Based on the current distance requirement of 1,000 feet from a cannabis retail storefront to a daycare, library, park, or community center, this property would not be eligible. Based on the proposed reduced distance requirement from 1,000 feet to 600 feet, this property would become eligible. However, if a cannabis retail storefront were to open here, no other cannabis retail storefront could locate within 500 feet, which is illustrated by this orange circle. This second example will focus on how the distance requirement for a cannabis retail storefront located outside of the downtown would change based on the latest proposal. This example is a commercial building on 1641 West San Carlos Street. It's pretty typical of a commercial area in San Jose, where the commercial business fronts a major street and there is a residential neighborhood behind it. This is a one-story commercial strip mall with a parking lot in front. This site is far enough away from sensitive uses based on both the current and draft criteria, with one exception, which is the required distance to residential uses, which are depicted in yellow on this slide. Today, 150 feet is required between a cannabis retail storefront use and a residential property as measured from the parcel boundary of the residential use to the parcel boundary of the cannabis use. This example shows that the distance between residential use and the example location is 80 feet, so it would not qualify based on the regulations today. The proposed changes, though, would increase the distance from residential to 300 feet, but will change the method of measurement. Instead of being a parcel-to-parcel measurement, the proposal would use a pedestrian path of travel. A pedestrian path of travel is shown here in orange. This type of measurement looks at how a pedestrian would walk unobstructed, by means of which the use may be approached, entered, and exited where open to the public. In this example, a pedestrian could walk from the corner of the residence shown along the sidewalk and through the parking lot to the front of the business. The total distance is 390 feet, which would meet the distance requirements under the proposed ordinance update and would be sufficient in this example for a possible cannabis retail storefront location. This image helps to illustrate why a pedestrian path of travel is being proposed. The sound wall between the business and residences offer no interfacing opportunity, meaning that if a person wanted to visit the location, they would most likely have to go around this wall. Whereas the parcel-to-parcel measurement now ignores the fact this wall exists. Likewise, the only entrance available to the public is in the front of the building, and all entrances and exits are monitored. If you would like to know about more possible cannabis locations based on the criteria and examples provided, please visit our Cannabis Ordinance update page. You can find these slides and the map by visiting sanjoseca.gov and searching for Cannabis Business Ordinance Update. So now that you know about how the city is proposing to regulate where cannabis businesses can open, let's talk about the process for opening a cannabis business. When an applicant feels that a cannabis business location qualifies, they begin their process by filing an application with the San Jose Police Department's Division of Cannabis Regulation. This application includes things like fingerprinting and background checks. It requires at a minimum a business plan, a security plan, which highlights how they will meet the municipal standards, such as the types of security systems in place, where the security guard will be posted, and how identification will be conducted. A management plan, inventory plan, and quality control plan. They also need to apply for and receive a zoning verification letter showing that they meet all zoning ordinance standards for the site. The zoning code verification letter includes an on-site visit where staff survey the surrounding businesses to ensure nothing is missed. They also need to pass a site inspection and apply for a state license after receiving a notice of completed registration. Both are required before operation at any location. It is important to note here that there's no public hearing process required for opening a cannabis business. I'll end this presentation by talking about the next steps and how you can ask questions and give us comments. The next steps in this process is finishing drafting the updates and referring the draft ordinance to the Airport Land Use Commission and Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then the City Council for a decision. We hope to have this at the Airport Land Use Commission at their meeting in late September, the Planning Commission in October, and the City Council in November. However, these dates are subject to change, but you can check the website for status updates. If you have questions or comments, you can contact staff at the email that will be presented shortly. We encourage you to ask questions and provide comments as soon as you can. If you are interested in providing comments directly to the Planning Commission and City Council, you can do so by either speaking at the upcoming Planning Commission and Council hearings. You can also email staff with your comments in advance of the hearing, and they will be included on the public record. You can find more information about when these public hearings will occur by visiting our website, sanjoseca.gov, and searching for the Planning Commission or City Council agenda. We are also in the process of studying the potential environmental impacts from these proposed policy changes as required by the California Environmental Quality Act. The environmental review happens before Planning Commission and City Council, is part of the overall consideration for approval, and will consist of what is called an initial study, which includes an analysis of potential impacts in a variety of areas such as air quality, odor, and noise. This document will be posted online and available for public review and comment for a period of 20 days prior to the Planning Commission meeting. You can find this posted on our website for review, and you can submit comments to us. For questions and comments, you can email me, Alexander Hughes, at alexander.hughes@sanjoseca.gov. Or you can email the division manager for the Division of Cannabis Regulation, Wendy Salazzi, at wendy.salazzi@sanjoseca.gov. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing back from you.